Greetings everyone, Mike here. Tonight I'm coming back to you with another selected reading. This time it is not fiction, we're going straight non-fiction, and we're going to be talking about warfare. But not just any warfare, unrestricted warfare. This is a book by two Chinese generals. It was published in 1999, basically highlighting what they observed as the increasing irrelevance of what might be called hot war. Now you can think of hot war as the opposite of Cold War. The Cold War was what we were in with Russia, and although they say the Cold War was over, you could argue that it didn't stop. Cold War was a behind-the-scenes war, proxy fighting, economic sanctions, all these different types of fuckery that we were doing with each other to try to break the back of the rival superpowers. So this will probably be in multiple parts, and I actually envision it as a larger series based on the history of China and America. It's very relevant for this year, but hopefully by the time we pick through this, you'll see that it's a lot more relevant than probably you hoped, but it's better to have eyes open than eyes closed. I don't think I'll read it straight through, but I'll try to read some of the most important sections. Particularly in this part one, we'll just kind of go through the introduction. So let's get right into it, shall we? So here's the editor's note from the FBIS. The FBIS, let's see here, let's bring this second screen up. So the FBIS is the CIA's foreign language broadcast information service. They collect and translate reports from around the globe. So this is their editorial notes. Unrestricted Warfare by Chao Dong and Wang Shangzhu. I don't know if I'll pronounce that right. I actually have a Chinese landlord, so she plays ignorant about politics, but I think she kind of has to, but we'll see. So this is the editor's notes. The following sections are taken from Unrestricted Warfare, published in China in February 1999, which proposes tactics for developing countries, in particular China, to compensate for their military inferiority vis-a-vis the United States during a high-tech war. The selections include the table of contents, preface, afterword, and biographical information about the authors printed on the cover. The book was written by two PLA senior colonels from the younger generation of Chinese military officers and was published by the PLA, I believe People's Liberation Army, Literature and Arts Publishing House in Beijing, suggesting that its release was endorsed by at least some elements of the leadership. It was published prior to the bombing of China's embassy in Belgrade, and it has recently drawn the attention of both Chinese and Western press for its advocacy of a multitude of means, both military and particularly non-military, to strike at the United States during times of conflict. Hacking into websites, targeting financial institutions, terrorism, using the media, and conducting urban warfare are among the methods proposed. I'm going to butcher these pronunciations. In the Zhongguo Qingyan Bao interview, Chao was quoted as saying, quote, "The first rule of unrestricted warfare is that there are no rules, with nothing forbidden." Elaborating on this idea, he asserted that strong countries would not use the same approach against weak countries because, quote, "strong countries make the rules while the rising ones break them and exploit loopholes. The United States breaks UN rules and makes new ones when these rules don't suit its purpose, but it has to observe its own rules or the whole world will not trust it." So my commentary, this is extremely important. We're gonna go way back in history to kind of connect the dots leading up to this. And unfortunately, some of this book being written right before the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, they didn't get to see some of their conclusions play out, but it was quite prophetic. And let's just try to read part one for tonight. So the preface. Everyone who has lived through the last decade of the 20th century will have a profound sense of the changes of the world. We don't believe that there is anyone who would claim that there has been any decade in history in which the changes have been greater than those of this decade. Naturally, the causes behind the enormous changes are too numerous to mention, but there are only a few reasons that people bring up repeatedly. One of those is the Gulf War. One war changed the world. Linking such a conclusion to a war which occurred one time in a limited area and which only lasted 42 days seems like something of an exaggeration. However, that is indeed what the facts are, and there is no need to enumerate one by one all the new words that began to appear after 17 January 1991. It is only necessary to cite the former Soviet Union, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, cloning, Microsoft, hackers, the Internet, Southeast Asian financial crisis, the Euro, as well as the world's finally and only superpower, the United States. These are sufficient. They pretty much constitute the main subjects on this planet for the past decade. However, what we want to say is that all these are related to that war, either directly or indirectly. However, we definitely do not intend to mythicize war, particularly not a lopsided war in which there was such a great difference in the actual power of the opposing parties. Precisely the contrary. In our in-depth consideration of this war, which changed the entire world in merely half a month, we have also noted another fact, which is that war itself has now been changed. We discovered that, from those wars which could be described in glorious and dominating terms, to the aftermath of the acme of what it has been possible to achieve to date in the history of warfare, that war, which people originally felt was one of the more important roles to be played out on the world stage, has at one stroke taken the seat of a B actor. A war which changed the world ultimately changed war itself. This is truly fantastic, yet it also causes people to ponder deeply. No, what we are referring to are not changes in the instruments of war, the technology of war, the modes of war, or the forms of war. What we are referring to is the function of warfare. Who could imagine that an insufferably arrogant actor, whose appearance has changed the entire plot, suddenly finds that he himself is actually the last person to play this unique role? Furthermore, without waiting for him to leave the stage, he has already been told that there is no great likelihood that he will again handle an A role, at least not a central role in which he alone occupies the center stage. What kind of feeling would this be? So an aside commentary here, this kind of sets it up how basically the United States has achieved military dominance in terms of our technology, but what they're trying to highlight is that that's now an irrelevant thing in a much more complicated and interconnected world, and we'll get into that even more here. Perhaps those who feel this most deeply are the Americans, who probably should be counted as among the few who want to play all the roles, including savior, fireman, world policeman, and an emissary of peace, etc. In the aftermath of Desert Storm, Uncle Sam has not been able to again achieve a commendable victory. Whether it was in Somalia or Bosnia-Herzegovina, this has invariably been the case. In particular, in the most recent action in which the United States and Britain teamed up to carry out air attacks on Iraq, it was the same stage, the same method, and the same actors, but there was no way to successfully perform the magnificent drama that had made such a profound impression 8 years earlier. Faced with political, economic, cultural, diplomatic, ethnic, and religious issues that are more complex than they are in the minds of most of the military men in the world, the limitations of the military means, which had heretofore always been successful, suddenly became apparent. However, in the age of might makes right, and most of the history of this century falls into this period, these were issues which did not constitute a problem. The problem is that the US-led multinational forces brought this period to a close in the desert region of Kuwait, thus beginning a new period. At present, it is still hard to see if this age will lead to the unemployment of large numbers of military personnel, nor will it cause war to vanish from this world. All these are still undetermined. The only point which is certain is that, from this point on, war will no longer be what it was originally, which is to say, if in the days to come mankind has no choice but to engage in war, it can no longer be carried out in the ways with which we are familiar. It is impossible for us to deny the impact on human society and its soul of the new motivations represented by economic freedom, the concept of human rights, and the awareness of environmental protection. but it is certain that the metamorphosis of warfare will have a more complex backdrop. Otherwise, the immortal bird of warfare will not be able to attain nirvana when it's on the verge of decline. When people begin to lean toward and rejoice in the reduced use of military force to resolve conflicts, war will be reborn in another form and in another arena, becoming an instrument of enormous power in the hands of all those who harbor intentions of controlling other countries or regions. In this sense, there is reason for us to maintain that the financial attack by George Soros on East Asia, the terrorist attack on the U.S. Embassy by Osama bin Laden, the gas attack on the Tokyo subway by the disciples of Aum Shinrikyo, and the havoc wreaked by the likes of Morris Jr. on the internet, in which the degree of destruction is by no means second to that of war, represent semi-warfare, quasi-warfare, and sub-warfare, that is, the embryonic form of another kind of warfare. So interesting that they named these people, especially George Soros, who's also considered an enemy by many in the United States that are aware of the geopolitical goings-on in our country and the way that what we call the deep state has infected our political system. But whatever you call them, they cannot make us more optimistic than in the past. We have no reason for optimism. This is because the reduction of the functions of warfare in a pure sense does not mean at all that war has ended. Even in the so-called postmodern, post-industrial age, warfare will not be totally dismantled. It has only reinvaded human society in a more complex, more extensive, more concealed, and more subtle manner. It is as Byron said in his poem Morning Shelley, "Nothing has happened. He has only undergone a sea change." War, which has undergone the changes of modern technology and the market system, will be launched even more in atypical forms. In other words, while we are seeing a relative reduction in military violence, at the same time, we definitely are seeing an increase in political, economic, and technological violence. However, regardless of the form the violence takes, war is war, and a change in the external appearance does not keep any war from abiding by the principles of war. If we acknowledge that the new principles of war are no longer using armed force to compel the enemy to submit to one's will, but rather are using all means, including armed force or non-armed force, military and non-military, and lethal and non-lethal means to compel the enemy to accept one's interest. This represents change, a change in war and a change in the mode of war occasioned by this. So, just what has led to the change? What kind of changes are they? Where are the changes headed? How does one face these changes? This is the topic this book attempts to touch on and shed light on, and it is also our motivation in deciding to write this book. Written on 17 January 99, 8th anniversary of the outbreak of the Gulf War. So pretty prophetic, because of course we got right back in the Middle East a couple years later with Bush Jr., finishing his daddy's business, as we might say. So it would have been interesting to see how they kind of highlighted the kind of uselessness or the misdirectedness of direct warfare, because even as our current president has highlighted, Iraq was one of our biggest mistakes in terms of trillions of dollars of investment, many lives lost, both civilian and military. This isn't some sort of anti-military thing, simply that the Chinese were obviously seeing that there are other more indirect ways of going about controlling dominance on the planet. And again, this begs all kinds of subjects that could come up, like the military-industrial complex. There's a great documentary called Why We Fight that's very neutral. It's done in a very classical documentary style, very journalistic, where they just interview different parties and talk about Eisenhower's prophetic farewell speech, saying that there is a military-industrial complex that has infected our economy and our political machine in the United States that wants never-ending war. And we really saw that play out in the last couple decades. So let's do part 1 and then we'll close off this narration. Part 1, on New Warfare, pages 1 through 9 in the original. Although ancient states were great, they inevitably perished when they were fond of war. Simarangju, technology is the totem of modern man. Stirred by the warm breeze of utilitarianism, it is not surprising that technology is more in favor with people than science is. The age of great scientific discoveries had already been left behind before Einstein's time. However, modern man is increasingly inclined to see all his dreams come true during his lifetime. This causes him, when betting on his own future, to prostrate himself and expect wonders from technology through a 1000 power concave lens. In this way, technology has achieved startling and explosive developments in a rather short period of time, and this has resulted in innumerable benefits for mankind, which is anxious for quick success and instant rewards. However, we proudly term this technological progress, not realizing that at this time we have already consigned ourselves to a benighted technological age in which we have lost our hearts. Technology today is becoming increasingly dazzling and uncontrollable. Bell Labs and Sony continue to put out novel toys. Bill Gates opens new windows each year, and Dolly, the cloned sheep, proves that mankind is now planning to take the place of God the Creator. The fearsome Russian-built Su-27 fighter has not been put to use on any battlefield, and already the Su-35 has emerged to strike a pose. But whether or not, once it has exhausted its time in the limelight, the Su-35 will be able to retire having rendered meritorious service is still a matter of considerable doubt. Technology is like magic shoes on the feet of mankind, and after the spring has been wound tightly by commercial interests, people can only dance along with the shoes, whirling rapidly in time to the beat that they set. The names Watt and Edison are nearly synonymous with great technical inventions, and using these great technological masters to name their age may be said to be reasonable. However, from then on, the situation changed, and the countless and varied technological discoveries of the past 100 years or so makes it difficult for the appearance of any new technology to take on any self-importance in the realm of human life. While it may be said that the formulations of the age of the steam engine and the age of electrification can be said to be names which reflect the realities of the time, today, with all kinds of new technology continuously beating against the banks of the age so that people scarcely have the time to accord them brief acclaim while being overwhelmed by an even higher and newer wave of technology. The age in which an era could be named for a single new technology or a single inventor has become a thing of the past. This is the reason why, if one calls the current era the nuclear age or the information age, it will still give people the impression that you're using one aspect to typify the whole situation. There is no doubt that the appearance of information technology has been good news for human civilization. This is because it is the only thing to date that is capable of infusing greater energy into the technological, quote, plague that has been released from Pandora's box, and at the same time, it also provides a magic charm as a means of controlling it. It is just that, at present, there is still a question of who in turn will have a magic charm with which to control it. The pessimistic viewpoint is, if this technology develops in a direction which cannot be controlled by man, ultimately it will turn mankind into its victim. However, this frightening conclusion is totally incapable of reducing people's ardor for it. The optimistic prospects that it displays itself are intensely seductive for mankind, which has a thirst for technical progress. After all, its unique features of exchanging and sharing represent the light of intelligence, which we can hope will lead mankind out of the barbarism of technology. Although this is still not sufficient to make us like those futurists who cannot see the forest for the trees and who use its name to label the entire age. Its characteristics are precisely what keep it from being able to replace the various technologies that we already have in great quantity, that are just emerging or which are about to be born, particularly those as biotechnology, materials technology, and nanotechnology. These technologies, which have a symbiotic relationship with information technology, in which they rely on and promote one another. Over the past 300 years, people have long since become accustomed to blindly falling in love with the new and discarding the old in the realm of technology, and the endless pursuit of new technology has become a panacea to resolve all the difficult questions of existence. Infatuated with it, people have gradually gone astray. Just as one will often commit 10 other mistakes to cover up one, to solve one difficult problem, people do not hesitate to bring 10 more on themselves. For example, for a more convenient means of transportation, people invented cars, but a long string of problems followed closely on the heels of the automobile. Mining and smelting, mechanical processing, oil extraction, rubber refining and road building, which in turn required a long string of technical means to solve until ultimately it led to pollution of the environment, destroying resources, taking over farmland, traffic accidents, and a host of thornier problems. In the long run, comparing the original goal of using cars for transportation with these derivative problems, it almost seems unimportant. In this way, the irrational expansion of technology causes mankind to continually lose his goals in the complex ramifications of the tree of technology, losing his way and forgetting how to get back. We may as well dub this phenomenon the Ramification Effect. Fortunately, at this time, modern information technology made its appearance. We can say with certainty that this is the most important revolution in the history of technology. Its revolutionary significance is not merely in that it is a brand new technology itself, but more in that it is a kind of bonding agent which can lightly penetrate the layers of barriers between technologies and link various technologies which appear to be totally unrelated. Through its bonding, not only is it possible to derive numerous new technologies which are neither one thing nor the other, while they also represent this and that, and furthermore, it also provides a kind of brand new approach to the relationship between man and technology. Only from the perspective of mankind can mankind clearly perceive the essence of technology as a tool, and only then can he avoid becoming a slave to technology, to the tool. During the process of resolving the difficult problems he faces in its existence, mankind is completely capable of fully developing his own powers of imagination, so that when each technology is used, its potential is exhausted, and not being like a bear breaking off corn cobs, only able to continually use new technology to replace the old. Today, the independent use of individual technologies is now becoming more and more unimaginable. The emergence of information technology has presented endless possibilities for matchups involving various old and new technologies. Countless facts have demonstrated that the integrated use of technology is able to promote social progress more than even the discovery of technology. The situation of loud solo parts is in the process of being replaced by a multi-part chorus. The general fusion of technology is irreversibly guiding the rising globalization trend, while the globalization trend in turn is accelerating the process of the general fusion of technology, and this is the basic characteristic of our age. So all that mess of paragraphs, they were just basically building up how it's kind of silly to point to any one type of technology, whether it's nuclear or electronic or information, but the fact that there is the globalized information web connecting everything together, it's just rapidly expanding and multiplying this process. And like they said, it's a Pandora's box. We don't really know where we're going with it. And for every type of thing we try to solve, as with transportation, we open up a bunch of other problems with resources and pollution and all that stuff. This characteristic will inevitably project its features on every direction of the age, and naturally the realm of war will be no exception. No military force that thirsts for modernization can get by without nurturing new technology, while the demands of war have always been the midwife of new technology. During the Gulf War, more than 500 kinds of new and advanced tech of the 80s ascended to the stage to strike a pose, making the war simply seem like a demonstration site for new weaponry. However, the thing that left a profound impression on people was not the new weaponry per se, but was rather the trend of systemization in the development and use of the weapons. Like the quote Patriots intercepting the quote Scuds, it seemed as simple as shooting birds with a shotgun. while in fact it involved numerous weapons deployed over more than half the globe. After a DSP satellite identified a target, an alarm was sent to a ground station in Australia, which was then sent to the Central Command Post in Riyadh through the U.S. Cheyenne Mountain Command Post, after which the Patriot operators were ordered to take their battle stations, all of which took place in a mere 90-second alarm stage, relying on numerous relays and coordination of space-based systems and C3I systems. Truly a shot heard round the world. The real-time coordination of numerous weapons over great distances created an unprecedented combat quality, and this was precisely something that was unimaginable prior to the emergence of information tech. While it may be said that the emergence of individual weapons prior to World War II was still able to trigger a military revolution, today no one is capable of dominating the scene alone. War, in the age of technological integration and globalization, has eliminated the right of weapons to label war and, with regard to the new starting point, has realigned the relationship of weapons to war. Let's skip ahead a little. Does a single hacker attack count as a hostile act or not? Can using financial instruments to destroy a country's economy be seen as battle? Did CNN's broadcast of an exposed corpse of a U.S. soldier in the streets of Mogadishu shake the determination of the Americans to act as the world's policemen, thereby altering the world's strategic situation? And should an assessment of wartime actions look at the means or the results? Obviously, proceeding with the traditional definition of war in mind, there is no longer any way to answer the above questions. When we suddenly realize that all these non-war actions may be the new factors constituting future warfare, we have to come up with a new name for this form of war. Warfare which transcends all boundaries and limits. In short, unrestricted warfare. If this name becomes established, this kind of war means that all means will be in readiness, that information will be omnipresent, and the battlefield will be everywhere. It means that all weapons and technology can be superimposed at will. It means that all the boundaries lying between the two worlds of war and non-war, of military and non-military, will be totally destroyed. And it also means that many of the current principles of combat will be modified, and even that the rules of war may need to be rewritten. However, the pulse of the god of war is hard to take. If you want to discuss war, particularly the war that will break out tomorrow evening or the morning after of the day after tomorrow, there is only one way, and that is to determine its nature with bated breath, carefully feeling the pulse of the god of war today. So that was the setup to the book. For the next part, we'll go over chapter 1. I think, as you can see, these two authors are extremely insightful and very well educated. On the screen here, they have all their footnotes, and they are very well read across a lot of different subjects. So, very interesting. They refer to things in terms of humanity, but as you'll see as they set it up, this is basically a plan to help China elevate itself and lower the elevation of the United States. But we'll get into more of the specifics as the book develops. Hopefully you see the main points were basically that the evolution of things is speeding up, and there's no one sector of humanity or technology that could take the label for today. They see this interplay as building on itself at a rate that we can't predict. They use that nice turn of phrase of trying to keep the pulse of the god of war, and how really you just kind of have to keep focusing on today and sort of keep an anticipatory, bated breath for what's coming tomorrow. But I'll go into chapter 1 next time, and hopefully that leaves you with something to look forward to. So thanks for listening. Bye-bye.